Hey everybody, welcome to the second MGRC candidate Q&A session. My name is Elena and I'm joined today by four of the MGRC candidates, two of whom are co-candidates, which should be pretty interesting. This is the agenda for today. I have it here. We have a lot to cover. Please feel free to use the chat. Um, and since we started about 5 minutes late, I think we should jump right into it. So we'll spend 10 minutes on each section, starting with candidate intros, and then going into the MGRC open questions that were submitted by the Zcash community. All of this is in the forum. And is there anything else I left out, candidates, before we get started? Oh, can everybody hear? Great question, Zcash Foundation. Thank you. Does the audio come in okay to people tuning in on YouTube? Okay, thank you, Dara. All right, so just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to be keeping time. So each candidate has 3 minutes each to give their intros and to give their answers. And with that, we should be able to cover a lot of ground today. I guess we didn't talk about how order we want to go in. The order that you're on in my screen is Hudson, Chris, and James, and that order works for me unless anybody is opposed.
Yeah, we can
Okay,
do that, or Fred mixed it up, whatever you want to do.
perfect. Okay, let's get right into intros. And candidates have 3 minutes each, and I'll stop sharing my screen so it can be all you guys all the time. So Hudson, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer.
I'm good.
All right, take it away with your intro.
Hey, everybody, I'm Hudson Jameson. I've been involved in the cryptocurrency, I guess, community ecosystem industry for 9 years, starting out at Bitcoin, just doing some mining and a little bit of stuff on the forums. Moved on from there to Darkcoin, which is now called Dash, and that was a really fun time. It was kind of my first endeavor into privacy coins. And then after meeting some of the early incarnations of the Zcash team a year or two before it launched, I started to get into Zcash. I was mining the first day Zcash got launched and looking at the live stream with a couple friends, getting really excited. And in between that time, I also was really involved in the early days of Ethereum and continue to be involved heavily in the Ethereum community as kind of a developer liaison between the community and the protocol developers at the low levels of the Ethereum ecosystem. A lot of that involves dealing day to day with different people fighting, different people, having to communicate and solve conflict. And I also work a day job at the Ethereum Foundation where I do DevOps work like setting up servers and also do some stuff within the community role, such as being an EIP editor, which is kind of like Zips, but for Ethereum, and also running the core developer meetings every 2 weeks. For my campaign pitch, I'm advocating for pragmatism over most things as far as how to resolve conflicts, how to look at the whole situation of the MGRC, and as we work together to build, the Zcash community and ecosystem up using these funds. Um, if I elected, I want to lean on my extensive experience being a leader in the cryptocurrency community to do the legwork behind some of the proposals, setting up the structure behind the MGRC, and optimizing for public communication and transparency. I'm real big on that. All of my dealings when I'm dealing with Ethereum stuff, I try to have recorded and live streamed just like we're trying to do now. Not to say that every single thing at the MGRC might need to be, public record. That'll get really dense and boring. But to say that as much as possible, as much as the public wants, we need to be transparent and open and very communicative with the community and the public at large. Um, I think my experience in the cryptocurrency ecosystem and especially the diversity of it will lend itself to give a different perspective than a lot of the other candidates who may be very embedded in the Zcash community. Um, I would come in without as much bias, maybe, not knowing some of the previous victories, conflicts, etc., and just try to have a fresh perspective on it all. Um, Thanks everyone for tuning in and taking the time to review the candidates and tuning into these calls. I really appreciate you considering me as a candidate.
That was perfect timing. Way to go, Hudson.
Awesome.
Okay, Chris, you are up next.
Thank you. And it's going to be myself and Mario Lal, both of which work at Placeholder, which is a venture capital firm that works exclusively in the crypto space. I've actually watched Hudson's work in the Ethereum space over the years and think he's done really great work there. I got involved in the crypto space full time in 2014. I had fooled around with Bitcoin in 2012, didn't really get it, and it took me a few years to really understand what was going on. Professionally, I got my start at a firm by the name of ARK Investment Management, which was the first public fund manager to invest in Bitcoin in 2015. I guess I've had a institutional background in the crypto space the whole time. In 2016, I started writing a book by the name of Crypto Assets, which was really targeted at educating investors on the crypto space as a whole. So not Bitcoin, not Ethereum, but all crypto assets and how this landscape's gonna evolve together. And then in 2017, got Placeholder off the ground. Placeholder's practice focuses on crypto economics and governance. We are known as one of the premier venture funds in the space, so we are not a hedge fund. And as a venture fund, we create a cocoon of capital to support varied networks with any of the issues that they're facing. We strongly believe in helping to make our own luck. We think that the whole space is really at a nascent stage where everyone getting involved in the ways that they are best suited can make a meaningful difference. That's why we've been involved in the Zcash network upgrade for Conversation for over the last year, and why we're currently running to be part of this MGRC. I'm going to kick it over to Mario to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, everyone. This is Mario. Most of you probably know me as MLPH research on the Zcash forum. I work as a governance researcher for Placeholder, and in that role, I've been participating in the new dev fund discussion since about mid-2019, but been working for Placeholder before that already. Prior to Placeholder, I was involved in a research project focusing on the historical development of finance and its role in promoting technological innovation, as well as teaching a class on the sociology of culture to undergraduates here in Estonia, which is where I'm from originally and also currently based. So like Chris said, for anyone who does not know this already, when announcing himself as an MGRC candidate, Chris proposed something perhaps a bit unusual relative to the other candidates, namely that if he ends up getting elected, he would be sharing the MGRC related workload with me. And we anticipate this, including things like working through grant applications, doing background research, keeping track of progress, updates, communications, especially on the forum, and just generally an extra pair of eyes on everything. Yeah, and that Placeholder, me and Chris interact pretty much on a daily basis anyway, often talking about Zcash, so this arrangement would not pose any logistical challenges for us. And yeah, given all that, we thought it makes sense for me to be on this call also to introduce myself live to the advisory panel, and yeah, make it clear that when voting for Chris, they're also voting for us sharing the work.
Great,
Thanks.
great. Thank you, Chris and Mario, for that. And now, James, it looks like you are sharing your screen, and I'll start the timer when you start talking. Oh, I don't think we can hear you if you might be on mute. And just a quick reminder, I'm looking in the chat, people are asking to speak up. So make sure you speak clearly into your microphone for the people tuning in to YouTube.
Sure. How do I sound, guys?
You sound great.
Good. Okay, thanks. Thanks for having me. My name is James Joseph. For anyone who doesn't know me, I basically spent roughly the last 10 years in clinical research. practicing patient data management, and reporting on the safety and efficacy of commercial drugs, which led me to take on more clinical research assignments and go into project management. My background is in stats and programming. I really enjoy financial research. I'm the technical founder of a cybercoin investment club, where I streamline reports based on the monies and messages that we exchange. So I really have two companies right now, clinical and financial research. Today, I'm here to seek 1,000 ZEC in exchange for 7%. I'm just kidding. But why I'm really here is to help plan and execute a grant review program in strict accordance to ZIP 1014. So in doing so, we will produce all the mandated assets and provide funding to at least 3 grants in 2021. So ZIP 1014 says the new debt fund system should be simple to understand, realistic to implement. So what I want to do over time, over the next couple of days, is help initiate a social contract between the Zcash community and the broader, what I call Zecosystem. So I have a practical plan, and I can tell you why I'm the one to help execute it. I'll help establish controls and levers for next year's candidates to continue to grow our funnel into the future. And more details on this will be available on my ZEC page and on the Zcash community forums. Thank you.
Thanks, James. And with that, I'm going to share my screen, or if you can stop sharing your screen, then I'll share and take us to the next question.
One small thing, Elena. I'm happy to rotate through just so Hudson doesn't have to lead us off on every question. I know it was suggested at the start, but you can just cycle through so that he's not always on the hot seat.
Perfect. Okay, you will be on the hot seat next, or you and Mario. And then James, you can kick us off on question 2. So let me share my screen again. I don't have to do this every time, but for people who might not know, a lot of the MGRC open questions are in the forum. They're very thoughtful, and I thought it would be helpful to put them up on the screen before we go into each of the candidate answers. So the first question is about ZIP ambiguity. This one, James, you alluded to it a little bit. I'll read the question off, and then Chris and Mario, maybe you guys can start with your answer. Then we'll go to James, and then we'll end with Hudson. So the ZIP 1014 language has some ambiguities. Where would you stand as a candidate or as a member of the MGRC on how to interpret and implement operational activities when there is no explicit language to guide you? Said another way, how should MGRC consider the community's will and preferences as it relates to these ambiguities?
So I think the ambiguities are why this first election is particularly important, because one of the core purposes of this first committee of 5 will be setting up the MGRC for the years ahead. We've seen in crypto a trade-off between centralization and execution speed, and I think that's something that we always have to keep in mind. I think Zcash has been walking the walk of progressive decentralization, and the MGRC is another step in that direction. That said, I think that we need to be careful of ossifying in anything before we have assessed really how this is going to operate and be received by the wild. And so I think, you know, there are things that have been raised that we need to decide upon, like compensation. Mario and I don't need compensation, but we do believe other people should be compensated if this is going to be their core source of income, and also if they're going to be taking on a core administrative role. That also bleeds into having a full-time administrator to keep things marching forward and on track. This is you know, a significant chunk of Zcash's resources that are going to the MGRC pool, and so it needs to be taken professionally. And then probably where we're going to be most opinionated is around how the resources are used. We're a professional asset allocator, and pretty strongly believe in using Zcash's resource pool smartly between grants, prizes, and investments. And part of our thinking is the MGRC is not something for the next 4 years. The MGRC is really something where we're going to have a resource pool, hopefully, if we manage it well, that can complement Zcash over the next many decades. And we don't have to necessarily do that by taking more Zcash inflation, but we can actually do it by smartly managing this existing resource pool. In cases of strong disagreement, I think that we always need to take the community's opinion into account. Coming out of this 4-year period, the next halving, I think that we need to have a much better voting system in place. And so that will be one of our core focuses of making sure that better governance mechanisms are getting funded and put in place to progressively continue to decentralize Zcash. Mario, I think we only have 30 seconds if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I think it's important to avoid things that the original SIP explicitly forbids. That's important for the legitimacy of the process, but everything else should be approached on a more case-by-case basis. And I think it's very important that whatever the MGRC internally decides, or an action they're considering, that is well communicated with the community for feedback and reactions prior to implementation. So
Great.
Yeah, that's the only thing I'd add.
Thanks. And then before we jump to you, James, I just want to read out, there's 2 comments in the chat, in the live stream chat. Do candidates view ZIPs as suggestions, central, or mandatory and exclusive to the charter? I would assume that means the MGRC charter. And Dara asks, how would candidates handle situations in which a good grant proposal is requesting a large amount of money, perhaps more than justified? So that's not directly related to the Zcash ambiguity question, but I just wanted to call it out in case candidates weren't keeping an eye on the chat. So James, I'll start the timer whenever you're ready.
I am ready. So I don't believe there's much ambiguity from what I can tell. I think the MGRC was specifically created to serve end users by drawing useful applications from the ecosystem of third-party developers and those who develop the platform for more functionality, drawing useful applications into the grant review system and creating utility so that we improve our KPIs, which I believe are users and usage. And if we can get that, we can drive our community forward and drive our vision forward. So as long as we realize where we are in this network flywheel. By the way, this is from Ali Yahya from A16Z. He's a partner at A16Z at TechCrunch May 2020 presentation. So I think if we know our role and stick to it, we can reduce a lot of the ambiguity. For example, in the ZIP, it says increasingly decentralized governance is not encouraged, I believe, or is encouraged. Governance in general should not be layered upon this. So explicitly, what we're required to do is fulfill transparency and accountability requirements. And we should do that as best as possible, as anonymously, privately, transparently as possible that our tools allow. And so in addition to the quarterly reports, the monthly developer calls, detailed review of performance, a roadmap, financial report, what we're creating are procedural assets for the next generation of committee members to use and continuously improve and progressively elaborate. So I think if we focus on that KPI of usage, users, in order to increase the size of the communities, say the Zcash Community Advisory Panel, we could be very successful attracting new committee members, and scoring them in accordance to the goals of this network flywheel. Thanks.
Great, short and sweet. Thank you, James. So Hudson, we'll go to you. And then, and the next question also has to do with the role of MGRC. So I feel like you kind of teed us up for that, James, really well. Okay, Hudson, I'll start whenever you're ready.
Great, give me 1 second because the stream just messed up.
Oh, okay, yeah. And I guess then to just reiterate, the question is about zip ambiguity. So how would you deal with ambiguities? Where do you stand on how to interpret them and how to consider the community's will and preference?
Right.
I liked, oh yeah, go ahead, Hudson.
I was about to say we're fixed, but you can continue, sorry.
Oh, nice. No, I was just trying to fill the air. Please go right ahead, and then we'll kind of summarize it before we go to the next question.
Perfect. So when it comes to ZIP 1014, it does have some ambiguities. It's not a ton of ambiguities, I don't think, but if I were to come into a situation with the rest of the MGRC where we don't really know how to approach something, I think that number one, we should look to what's already been written in the forums and on videos, particularly the Zcash Foundation came out with a video where very recently where Andrew Miller and a few other people talked about the fund structure, how it's going to operate on a legal and structural level, since the Zcash Foundation will be the one dispersing the funds for us, is my understanding. But as far as if there's further ambiguities after that, I would look toward the Zcash Foundation's values and goals page, where they have listed their different values. There's 3 of them specifically: transparency, inclusivity, and humility. I think being transparent about us battling some of these issues that we're going to come up is very important. Being inclusive of different teams and trying not to, play favorites or pick sides is going to be very important, and having humility to not have big egos and to be able to be nice but call out BS at the same time is really important for a group like this. By the way, I just mentioned that video that happened a few days ago, and I mentioned the values and goals page. If you go to the Zcash forums and you go to the governance thread that I opened to announce my candidacy, I actually posted both my pitch and all of the questions I'll be answering today, a little bit longer form some of the time, in the document. To some of the YouTube questions, if someone asks for a lot of money and we don't think that they need that much money in particular, it's one of 2 things you can do. And I've had this experience with Moloch DAO, which is an Ethereum decentralized autonomous organization that does grant funding. I've been a part of that. And we would generally talk to the grantee and say, hey, do you want to change your scope, or do you want to change the funding, because we think this is too much for reasons X, Y, and Z. So then usually they would come back with a counter proposal, and we would work with them from there, unless they're just trying to do a money grab, in which case we would just kind of indicate that that isn't really the right place for them to be putting in their application, something of that nature. But maybe not be mean, but at the same time get to the point so we're not wasting our time. And that's pretty much how I think we should handle a situation that happens like that. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you both, or thanks to everybody who answered. I'll do a quick summary. The question was on Zcash ambiguity, and Chris and Mario talked about the need to be practical and in accordance with the MGRC with the ZIP, but to resist ossification. And I thought it was interesting you mentioned improving how the community votes. James, you mentioned that there might not be that much ambiguity, and maybe sticking to the letter of the law, which I thought was a really good point. And Hudson, I thought it was awesome that you really focused on thinking about the values of our community and using that as a guiding star. So the next question, and I'll do the same thing I did last time, I'm just going to put it up on the screen. The next question is about the role of MGRC. This has come up, this question has been asked a million different ways. So I just tried to summarize it in two main questions, which is, should the MGRC be a driving actor or provide sourcing? I guess that means and provide. So should the MGRC be a driving actor, providing sourcing, oversight, and review? Should the MGRC be more of a bureaucracy with hierarchy, continuity, defined rules, and expertise? Or should it be more of an ad hocracy, decentralized and flexible?
So real quick, actually, the first sentence, if you click, or you don't have to click on the context, but basically Andrew was trying to say, should it be a driving actor, kind of like outwardly looking for candidates and applications and grantees, or should it be more you wait for them to come to you and then you provide sourcing, oversight, and review? Is how I read the question, but I'd love to hear the candidates' views on how the question's read.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, there were. If you go into the forum in the MGRC open questions, this theme of what the role of MGRC should be comes up time and time again. So James, maybe we'll start with you on what you believe the role of the MGRC should be. Before I let you talk though, let me just quickly summarize the questions that came up in the chat. Walter asked, does decentralized governance include on-chain voting and DAO-style arrangements? So maybe to what extent does MGRC help dictate that or govern that? And I think that was the last question that came in that's relevant to this. So I'll start, James, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so the question is about bureaucracy. How do we set up our structure? I think organizations have two types of structures. There's functional, there's divisional. And a divisional structure is based on territory or region, and it leads to product specialization. So, for example, I'm very interested in having a specialist on the team to develop protocols that are specially suited for, let's say, privacy or security review of the deliverables from the grants that we fund. And procedures like that require specialists. So I like to think of the team as a team of individual roles. When together, they produce synergy. So I think it's very important to think about not only who you're voting for, but the people you're voting for, the administration, the committee. In terms of bureaucracy, I think every committee has to align with the overall vision of the MGRC, which is to increase the usage and user and the useful applications, the utility, and give it to the end users and build a community. And the way we do that internally, I think every committee should have a rubric in which their committee grant program is scored. And across all the committees, they're all scored the same. The KPI would be users and usage. And I think each committee should have a mission of how they would go ahead and fulfill that obligation of performing. And within that mission, to review each one of the grants, the first committee, initial committee, should define a rubric that they themselves would use after speaking with the stakeholders, such as the community, protocol developers, etc. A rubric that they themselves would use to judge these grants in order to fulfill their mission, their roadmap, and the overall vision of the MGRC. So that's how I think the governance blossoms from the mission and end.
Nice. You have about 40 seconds left. And so I kind of wanted to also hear a little bit more from you, James, in terms of the role. It sounds like you're saying each committee should kind of set what their mission is, their objective is for the year, and then leverage like whatever expertise people have. Did you want to add anything in terms of like bureaucracy versus adhocracy, if it should be more hands-off or more hands-on?
I think it really depends on how the team works together. The team may find that one person takes lead on certain things, on certain projects that they may tackle. It's a small team, and there needs to be a lot of ice broken, and I think they'll be very friendly after this year.
Great. Okay, awesome. Thank you. And I forget the order. Is Hudson next, or is it Chris and Mario for this round of questioning? I believe it is.
I think it's
Be
us.
different.
Okay, so let's go to.
Go ahead, Mario.
Yeah, let's go to you guys next.
Okay. I'll start answering, and Chris can add. I think for this first batch of MGRC members, for the first year, the priority should be setting up procedures to handle the second option in the question, which is basic sourcing, oversight, and review. The need for the MGRC to become more of a driving actor, I think that should be assessed, not assumed. At this point, nobody knows exactly how, like what the first year is going to look like, what the first round of applications is going to look like, how much activity it is going to generate. So, starting off, I think most of the focus should be to make sure that the basic procedures are in place, and then based on experience over time, develop a broader strategy or an action plan to encourage and attract more activity. The second part of the question, I think it's a bit of a loaded question, because people have preconceptions and attitudes about the word bureaucracy. But if you think about it, I think the MGRC, as it's defined in the original SIP, is a little bit of a bureaucracy already. I mean, there are going to be written rules and reporting requirements, and these need to be followed, for procedural clarity and legitimacy in the eyes of the broader community. So I think some level of formality and bureaucracy is, baked in already. But that doesn't mean that the MGRC can't, operate on a more ad hoc basis or can't be flexible. And it's definitely important to avoid creating, excessive barriers to entry, both for potential new members of the MGRC, but also for potential applicants. So I definitely think that you can go into excess with the bureaucratic side of things, and that should definitely be avoided. Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I'm going to layer in a few things here. I think we got 40 seconds. The way I see this first year of the MGRC is really making the MGRC in this process resilient to any members that are elected in the future. And what I mean by that is we can't, for a privacy preserving network, we can't be reliant on personalities. We can't have meat space identities that can ultimately kneecap this effort in 3, 5, 10 years time, when Zcash is much bigger than it is. And so this is where, going to what Mario was saying, a big part of this is setting up the processes and procedures. I think steady state, I'd love to see this something like 80% oversight and review and 20% driving actor in areas where this committee is seeing opportunities for Zcash. And that's where a prize program would get really effective, of saying, hey, we really want this built. Here's this amount of capital, come and compete for it, and that will be built for Zcash. But by and large, in an oversight and review capacity.
Great. Thank you, Mario and Chris. And Hudson, finish this question round with your thoughts on what the role of the MGRC should be.
Great, thank you. So, I actually had to think a little bit on this one whenever I saw the question and I looked at the context that Andrew Miller had kind of, described in the question. And he was torn on the answer, and I am too, to some extent. I think that actually I loved Chris's and Mario's answer, because it's kind of what I wrote here, which is it's going to start as a sourcing, oversight, and a review committee. I'm thinking to test the waters, and then it may morph into more of an actively driven entity. I think starting out just hitting the floor running as an actively driven entity is a mistake before things are set up, because we could have too many applications come in. And I guess the top two reasons are, yeah, like we don't know how many grant applications are going to come in, and we don't know the capabilities and time commitments of the MGRC members. So we don't want to be like going too fast when people don't have the right time commitments and things are off kilter. Um, the as far as should it be a bureaucracy or an ad hocracy, um, I feel like it should be a decentralized and flexible structure more than a bureaucracy, at least in the traditional sense of the term bureaucracy, with all the negative connotations of red tape and distractions. Um, I like the idea of it being kind of like a DAO, just to kind of dog food these decentralization ideas. And it'd be really cool if we could build a voting platform or DAO, even if it's just like elements of a DAO on Zcash, using like secret messages, Z addresses, stuff like that for different voting from the MGRC candidates. This is not me advocating for coin voting by and large. I actually really don't like coin voting a lot of the time, depending on who the actors are who are voting. But as far as how this should unfold in general, I'm hoping it's going to be kind of flexible at first, so we can determine how we should go from there. Um, Other than that, I think I'm just real excited about seeing how everyone works together, and that's going to be the driving factor of all this. What the time commitments are, how everyone works together, that's going to be definitely key here. And that's my answer.
Oh, okay. Thank you all for that answer. So quick summaries of themes of what people mentioned in this, what is the role of MGRC question. James and Hudson, both of you mentioned the need to kind of wait and see who the committee members are and see how they work together. I really love, Mario, when you said things need to be assessed, not assumed. So those were some of the common threads that I picked up on, but really, really great to hear everybody's perspective there. If people are just joining in the live stream, a quick reminder that all of these MGRC open community questions are available in the forum. Candidates are encouraged to submit their written answers as part of this process. And then there is a little bit of chatter in the chat back and forth about what approach the community should take when assessing MGRC, which is the other side of this coin, and I think equally interesting, but not something we have time for today. So this is question number 3. We'll do this question and then open it up to questions from the community. Same format, 3 minutes each. This time, I think we've gone full circle. So Hudson, we can start with you this time. I'll read the question and then hand it to you. So the question is about teamwork. Have you had previous experiences of being put together rather arbitrarily in a team before? If so, how did you manage? How will you go about managing disagreements between yourself and other MGRC members? And if there are disagreements between MGRC members with each other, maybe not you. So this question's all about teamwork. Hudson, I'm sure you have experiences to draw from. I'll start when you're ready.
All right, thank you very much. So as far as previous experiences, I'll draw on 3 experiences just in particular that I have about being arbitrarily put on a team. I've already mentioned Moloch DAO, which is a grant funding DAO in Ethereum, where every member gets voting shares proportional to their contribution to the DAO. It's used to fund public goods projects, and there's a lot of ad hoc asymmetric discussion, as well as some, voice or video meetings that happen in order to determine what grants go out. There's also grants that you can submit yourself. Just about anyone can submit a grant on behalf of someone else if you're a Moloch DAO member. So it's been a really interesting time to get all the different personalities in the same chat room and determine, what needs to get funded and what doesn't need to get funded. Also have experience as an EIP editor, which, like I mentioned earlier, is similar to a zip editor, but on Ethereum, where I work with a group of editors, and they are mostly community members and other protocol developers and things that make decisions about approvals within the EIP process and issues that happen as we go through this whole protocol update and community-driven update process. The third one is I founded a group called the Ethereum Cat Herders, which is a group of volunteers who go in and try to work with the community to fill gaps in where there needs to be project management tasks. For instance, note taking on major calls, so we could have transcripts or notes depending on the call for things like protocol meetings, Ethereum 2.0 upgrade meetings, things like that. We also have podcasts that talk about our EIPs so that people can get more educated on them. We host various forums on trying to figure out community sentiment using polling. There's just a bunch of stuff. So it's just a bunch of different people, and we each are assigned different things or self-assign ourselves. So it's a little chaotic, but we bring order to the chaos, is what I feel like. As far as how will you go about managing disagreements between yourself and other MGRC members and other MGRC members with each other, I have a lot of experience dealing with conflict resolution within decentralized communities, and I feel like I would just leverage those skills that I've learned over the years. A lot of it's not like learned, but I feel like a little bit innate within personalities, and I feel like all the personalities just about I've ran across so far within candidates seem to be very open to disagreements and things like that. Very few of them are, seemingly overly stubborn or things like that. So I don't see any major problems occurring within MGRC members, but basically communication when it comes to handling those types of disagreements that would come out of this MGRC effort.
Great, thanks, Hudson. It looks like the live stream background is frozen, but the sound is still coming through. So that
I'm on
it.
it.
Okay, excellent.
It's fixed.
Okay, great. And so then Chris and Mario, I believe you guys are next in order. I believe you are, but I'm getting a little tied up in my shoelaces.
We can go, unless James, you'd have a preference to go.
I'll go ahead, sure. Yeah.
Okay,
Go
take it away, James.
So the question is teamwork. My experiences, have I formed a team? Do I play nice? So I guess I formed a lot of teams. The one that comes to mind is a ragtag team of painters and marketers when I had a painting company back in my college days. There's also in my career for clinical research organizations around the world, managing teams of programmers, different stakeholders, the investment club, attracting those partners, and also what I like to call the minor grant review committee, where I spent Zcash that I generated from the community to fuel certain projects that bolstered the use of Z address directories and the anonymous message board. In all these experiences, what I found was everyone is driven by a mission and a larger vision. And so I think the mission of each committee is to get third-party developers and keep useful apps, useful utilities, build a reference code base for other open source developers to use, perhaps integrate some of these tools, the community of users and developers. So I keep mentioning that the KPI is users and usage, but in terms of a team, how do you remain accountable internally and externally? And this is where I like to differentiate and say, we should be the adoption that we want to see. And internally, we should use anonymous Zcash message boards that are publicly viewable. And externally, perhaps more coin petitions and other ways to grow the Zcash community advisory panel. So communication, I agree with Hudson. And it's just the tools that I would use are more Zcash first.
Great. Thanks, James. And then let's move over to Chris and Mario, just so we have enough time for questions at the end from the audience.
Great. So I do want to point out that Mario posted our written responses to these questions as well on the forum, similar to Hudson. In terms of how Placeholder works, as a venture investor, we have relationships with over 20 companies and networks. While we do control the diligence process of who we get involved in, as a long-term investor who's involved over many years, inevitably teams end up changing, leadership shifts. And so we are arbitrarily put together with people all the time that we learn how to work with. Part of our identity, in particular through the bear market that we've just gone through, is really helping out when times get tough. When a lot of other investors left, we stayed and we rolled up our sleeves and we worked. And we worked on the things that we believed in. In terms of, what happens when you put arbitrary groups together, I feel like the types of crises can either come from an excess of opinions or not enough opinions. And an excess of opinions kind of comes when people are hot-headed, no one's listening, everyone's speaking, and in those situations we take on much more of a mediator role, where we're trying to pull together all the voices that we're hearing, often helping people see that they're not as far apart as their egos may be leading them to think they are, but really serving as a canvas to pull people together and fill in some helpful context where we see things are missing. So that's a crisis of when there's an excess of opinion. When people are scared and there's almost no opinion and no one is taking action, we are very comfortable putting out an opinion and putting forward a plan of action. To be very candid, we are not, because of the nature of our work, we are not going to be the administrative function within the MGRC. We will always be a thoughtful partner to reason through things, to connect with people who we think would be the executors or administrators. But in those times when there is no opinion, we're happy to provide an opinion and basically jumpstart a process to begin rebuilding. Did I miss anything, Mario?
Was there a second part to the question about handling conflicts between MGRC members?
Right. Yeah. I guess, with the MGRC members, humility is just so important. And I think people need to keep that in mind when they're electing people. And I think so long as everyone is humble and everyone recognizes that we are all uniquely flawed, then we can always find ways to work together.
Great. Okay, those are 3 amazing answers. We have 8 minutes left until the top of the hour. I'm sure we can go over a little bit, but probably not that much. Now is the time that we can open it up to questions in the chat. I can also ask some questions from the MGRC question bank. Before we get into that, I just want to say, really a huge thank you to all of the candidates who are taking time to participate in this process. I know it can probably be a little intense getting a lot of scrutiny about your candidacy and how you would be on the committee. So just a really strong, warm thank you for even participating in this process. So I'll ask for people tuning in on the live stream, if there are any questions that you would like to pose to the MGRC candidates now. Walter asks something about, or what about the quality and standards of submissions? It'd be interesting to hear your all perspective, if there should be kind of like a cutoff or how you would assess it. James, I think you mentioned establishing some sort of rubric, and maybe we can kind of hot potato that question. And if somebody else has another question that comes in the chat, I'll throw that one in there as well. So yeah, let's talk about what you think would be a a quality submission, or how you would go about setting standards for the type of submissions you want to see as MGRC. And James, we'll start with you first.
Sure. So as I was mentioning, I think the overall goal is to increase the utility of the applications and find more end users and grow our community. And I want the committees to have free reign on how they want to be able to do that. And so the type of grants they attract should be their program. This is the committee that we vote for to establish a program, and they make that transparent to the community by publishing their rubric, which I call a scorecard. And these rubrics are supposed to be used to facilitate MGRC performance, which is users and usage. And so every committee should be graded on the key performance indicator of usage and users, no matter what their rubric or their roadmap is. And so I think it's an important procedural asset for each committee to produce a mission statement
scorecard.
and a rubric. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so Chris, Mario, and Hudson, if you want to chime in on that. Also, Dara had asked earlier, what about large grants or grants that are either too big in scope or asking for too much funding or not enough funding? How would you go about negotiating that with the people submitting? And then Phil also asks, should the selling of Zcash acquired by the MGRC be tracked from start to finish, or should we blindly trust that market manipulation and coin voting won't happen with grants? So that question is not as related to submissions, but Hudson, Mario, and Chris, if you want to take a stab at it.
Hudson?
Sure, yeah. I'll take a stab at it real quick. So we were talking about kind of if there needs to be like a standard setup for judging these grants is kind of how I read the question. And I think there needs to be more of a principles or mission statement or something like that, an overall goal, and maybe even a theme in some ways, or different themes that people can apply for. I don't think there should be a rubric that is like numbered like those old school, you're in college or even grade school and you're like, okay, rate this on this rubric. Because I think that takes away from the uniqueness of each grant, and people are going to have biases sneak in when they're trying to do it very analytically, when it's something that's going to be unique to each. There's uniqueness to each grant. There's stuff that people are going to be more focused on the engineering side. So for instance, I have a computer science background and a security background, so if there's a security audit one or something with protocol layer engineering, I can peek in and understand some of the stuff. But then if there's a marketing one, which I think is incredibly important, I'm not going to have the expertise to deal with that. So if I were to grade those, it's going to turn out radically different. So having guiding principles, but not necessarily a strict structure, is probably what I would do there. And then the other question was from Walter, was about selling Zcash, right?
The question was from Phil, but yeah,
Phil.
how would you?
Yeah. So
how would you track the selling of Zcash?
I think we would just consult the Zcash Foundation, because that sounds like it starts going into some legal and regulatory territory there that I just don't have the expertise in, so I'd rely on others to work on that. But that doesn't sound like something that would be insurmountable, and it would sound like something that would be a combination of, just common sense and regulations and legal structure. That's the answers that I had, because I already answered Dara's earlier, so I'll pass it over to Chris and Mario to answer all of them.
Thanks, Hudson. So I think we need to start with defining the types of submissions that we can receive. Placeholder's been involved with a handful of grants programs with some of its portfolio networks in time, and we've actually gone full cycle of setting up and winding down one grants program. So we've seen grants programs succeed. We've also seen them not succeed. I think that while grants are amazing, they are not the only way to fund things. For example, if you look at prizes, if you put out a targeted prize, you will source more work per dollar around that prize, and you will get a competitive landscape of people competing and basically submitting the end product that you then all get to choose. And so you know absolutely that what you set out in the prize parameters has been fulfilled. Otherwise, you don't grant the prize. So that submission process looks very different from a grant submission process. I also think there's an opportunity, and some of this conversation has been occurring on the forum, for Zcash to make investments where it owns a piece of the capital of the thing that it invests in. It's not for Zcash to go and become a venture investor like placeholder. It's more if there's an opportunity for Zcash to grow its resource pool, and that's on the table, then I think it would be foolish to forego that opportunity. And so right here we have grants, we have prizes, and we potentially have investments. I think all three of those need to be defined in terms of the types of submissions that we would receive, and then how the MGRC comes to a yay nay decision is yet another process that needs to be defined. So this goes back to maybe the first question around ambiguity. We have a lot of processes and procedures we need to define, which is where kind of the level-headedness and varied experience of these members is going to be really important.
I'll add one quick thing here. For anyone interested, we have done some background research on grants versus prizes internally. So if you go to the Zcash forum and look for grants versus prizes, MLPH research, we made a longer blog post about the relative merits of each.
And can you both answer Dara's question about how do you go about maybe negotiating with a submission if they are asking for too much money or if their scope seems too broad? What you
go ahead and answer that one, Elena.
Yeah, I mean, we can run a little bit over time. So I think Dara had mentioned only Hudson had answered that. So
okay.
I think both of you
Sure,
guys can. Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is, you know, we outline funding parameters all of the time. And so we have a good sense for how much money something takes to build. We've actually been one of the more valuation and funding conservative investors out there. Not a huge fan of, you know, raising $100 million to build something. We've participated in a couple of those, but not many. We're more fans of lean budgets that incentivize, you know, quick action. So, you know, if someone came with a great idea, but they were 10x above a budget, I would have no problem being kind and candid about the fact that the budget was too much. And then in terms of, you know, how to handle Zcash, once someone has completed a grant, and I think actually grants need to also vest based on milestones. But once someone's completed a grant or a prize or gotten a venture investment, if that Zeke has been sent to them, you know, unless we're going to build a vesting contract, at that point, that Zeke is now sovereign with that individual. And if you didn't trust them in the first place, then you shouldn't have given them Zcash resources to begin with.
James, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. So the question is about estimating costs. And I think we have some communication tools that we've already touched upon. Specifically, internally, we could use our own specialists that we have on the committee and publicly state our reasoning behind cost estimates. Externally, we can pull from the community advisory panel. I think we also could pay consultants to give us expert judgment or gather data about what the cost should really be, because experts may have different techniques like analogous estimating, parametric, bottom up, 3-point estimating. So these are stuff, there are things that our committee may not be able to cover, but we shouldn't be afraid to reach out to the community or even pay consultants. We need not get them onto the committee themselves, but the committee could ask for their help.
Great. So I think that kind of wraps up the MGRC Q&A session. We have one more tomorrow. It is moderated by Amber Balday. And Walter asks Mario and Chris if you could share the link that you mentioned maybe in the YouTube live stream chat or directly on the forum. Great. I want to say thanks again to the candidates. This does feel a little bit like miscongeniality, or I feel like since the spirit in the air, at least in the United States, is very civic minded. Kudos to the Zcash community for being very in theme with the times. But yeah, appreciate you guys. And then the last ticky-tacky items are dates. So the Zcash Community Advisory Panel is the panel that's going to be voting on the 17 MGRC candidates. Voting starts September 4th, which is next week. And I believe that the Zcash Foundation will be announcing the expanded Zcash Community Advisory Panel members. So stay tuned on that. And yeah, I think that's everything. Thanks again for participating, and thanks to the audience for your very thoughtful questions.
Thanks, Elena.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Elena.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.